Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're diving into the full animation pipeline for games, starting in Autodesk Maya, where we'll create a basic animation and then bring that animation into Unity to see it in action. Whether you're animating a character, a prop, or anything in between, understanding how to get your motion from Maya into Unity is crucial and is a skill any game artist and developer should have. We'll cover the key information that you need to know to get an asset from an application like Maya into Unity and up and running inside of your game with some basic animations. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. What we have here is our character, kind of where we left it off in this LOD setup. So we're going to create a quick rig for this, very simple for this guy. Before we do though, I am going to take my lens material here and just crank on the transparency here. So that way we can see through this thing and have a better idea of how this is actually going to look when animated. I'm going to leave everything on for now so you can see the rigging process. For this, I'm going to create a single joint. So we're going to come in here to rigging to skeleton, just create a simple joint here, and use this as our base for our rig. So we don't really need more than this in terms of building this rig. And as a matter of fact, we could do this unskinned, meaning we could just animate on top of geometry. But for the sake of making this kind of simulate what a character might look like for this project, let's just go ahead and set this up. When you're working with LODs like this, you can actually just bind them to the joint. So I could select all of these, for example, shift select the joint here and come in here to our rigging menu, go into our skin and just do a quick bind skin. And all of these should move with this joint. You want your LODs to all be controlled by the same joint. Now at this stage, if you want to, you could come into your LODs here and just control H them. These ones did get out of order somehow, so I'm just going to make sure LOD 0 is on top. And we're going to use this as our basic rig. Now to make it feel more like a rig, let's go ahead and give it a control. I'll come up here to my nerves primitives. We'll give it a circle here, make it a little bit bigger, freeze the transform, and go ahead and have this control the joint here. And then we'll go ahead and select our curve, shift select our joint here, and just do a constraint parent constraint. And that should be fine for what we need here to just get a basic control for this object. Now, if we want, we could also add in other controls. For example, we could do something like an aim control if we wanted this to be able to look at things. So we could build this out from here. I'll go ahead and just name this my probe underscore CTRL, and we'll just name this probe underscore joint so we know what's going on. So we really just have to think about, what we want this rig to do at the end of the day, what kind of functionality it needs to have. So something that might be beneficial here is to just put this in a group. So we have a master group. And one of the things I might want to be able to do is have this kind of aim at something, if it's going to look, for example. So for that, I could just create something like a locator here and bring it forward a ways here, just right in front. I'll go ahead and modify freeze transforms on that and name this probe underscore aim. And I could use an aim constraint on this group now to make it aim at this in theory. So how that would work is we'd select the object to aim at. We can then control select the group here and do a constrain aim. And we might have to go in the options here. There's different vectors here. We want to make sure Y is the up vector, so X, Y, Z. And then the aim vector here is going to be X, Y, Z. So we'd probably want this to be in Z, if I am correct, and hit apply. And in theory, what that should have done is aimed it at this, but you can see it moved. So what do we want to make sure is checked? Make sure maintain offset is checked, and then apply. And if we do that, that will make it so this aims at this. And more importantly, when I move this, we can use this to make it aim at it. But notice that didn't quite work. So we might have to change our hierarchy order in terms of how we have this set up. Because right now, this is not exactly going to work with our setup if we have that control aiming at this like so. We'd want to be able to still move this, but maintain the aim. So in order to achieve that, we need to have a different setup here than we have currently, where the aim allows this to rotate, but we have something above this. So for example, if I created a group above this and moved that group, you can see that would allow the aim to move, and then we'd also need to move this. So in this instance, what I might do is utilize this NURBS curve just kind of like a null, make it invisible here, make it our aim curve, and create a new curve here that allows us to move this and the object separately. So what might that look like? We'll go ahead and create another curve here. So in this case, we'll create a circle. And I'll freeze transforms on this one as well. And for this one, we can just parent this group underneath that and the locator. So I can parent this underneath here. I can parent the probe aim under here. So I'm just going to middle mouse drag there. And I'll just name this probe underscore rig. So now this should allow me to move these, but more importantly, I should be able to move this and still move this separately, but not quite. We still need something that lets us move that, right? So we have the base idea here for the probe rig. Now we need an individual probe control that is above the aim group. So in this case, we'll create one more NURB circle and just kind of bring it out here. Freeze transforms on that, and we'll nest it underneath our probe rig, and then we'll nest the group under that. So now that group is underneath there. That allows us to move this separately, and then we can use this to move it together, and then we can aim with this here. All right, so I think this will give me a little rig we can use here. I'll go ahead and just name this NURB circle here, probe underscore CTRL, and I might need to rename our groups here, like our probe aim. So that way we have it all set up. Now, if we're going to build this into a proper rig, what we generally do is group all these. This would be probe underscore rig, and then we would nest these things here. So we'd have something like a GNT underscore group for joint group, and we would have a CTRL underscore group for controls. So let's go ahead and save this. I'll save this as a new one, and we'll just make this our probe underscore rig. And now we can go ahead and give this guy a couple animations. So as far as this goes, there's a couple animation clips I want to create. When creating game animation, you're always going to have something called an idle, and that's basically what this does when it's not doing anything. So for this, it's going to be a basic up and down movement, kind of like our rocks, very simple. But then we might want to have some variance in terms of its actions, and these could be scriptable or they could be programmed in. In this case, what I might have this thing do is probe for a bit and then go in a circle and kind of look around an object and then probe again. Now, we can set this up inside our state machine to basically go from our idle to our action back to our idle. Normally, you would have some sort of code that would branch between these two. We're not going to do that, so we might do a little bit extra with our idle and make it baked, so to speak, meaning that there is no action that controls it. It's just going to idle for a bit and then it's going to go. So let's go ahead and take a look at that and talk about how we might approach that. First things first, when animating for games, you want to switch your frames per second to 30. That is the amount the game engine uses, 30 frames per second. So let's go ahead and swap that over here to 30 before we do any animation. And then we can just set up a basic animation here. So I can grab my main rig control that I want to use for idling here, and I can move this off the ground a ways, away from 0, 0. And I could just think about how long I want this to kind of go up and down for in a cycle. So one step in a walk cycle is about 30 frames. So let's go ahead and just set this to 30. So we'll go up basically for 15, down for 15, and then return. So I'm going to hit S here. Then we're going to go up for, actually, let me redo my math here. We're going to go ahead and set a keyframe at 0, set a keyframe at 30. And then at 15, logically, we could go up or down. In this case, I think we'll just have it go up like so. And if I hit play, that would give us our effect. Now that looks a little bit too strong. So I'm going to switch over here into my animation workspace real quick. And we can just come into the graph editor and we can edit this. So rather than having that go way up in Y, I'll come to the translate Y here and just make it go up a little bit. So that way we get this effect here of it just kind of going up and down. Now with that turned on, we can actually bake this for a few seconds as well. For example, if we wanted this to kind of idle before we do our spin, it could be a good idea to bake that in for this particular asset. Normally, we would just make this a clip and then we would loop this in the game engine. But because we're not using any sort of code to go from one action to another, in this instance, we would bake it in. And this can be used for any sort of environmental thing you want to have, kind of have variety, yet be repeated. So I'm going to highlight these curves to just see the post-infinity, pre-infinity curve to make sure they're nice and smooth, and it looks good. I'm then going to set this out here to be a decent amount of frames. Let's see, how long could this idle for before we get bored? So 10 would be kind of a lot. That would be 300 frames. So that's pretty intense, but that might work for us. So what I might do is just set this out to 300 frames here. Go ahead and bring it all the way out here, and you can see how it's pre-infinity, post-infinity all the way there. What we can then do is we could bake this to be idling for that period of time. And we could add variation to this if we wanted to. For the sake of this, though, let's keep it simple and just have it set up here. So with that in place, I could come up here to my edit. I could come to the key section, and we could do this bake simulation. We can go into the options here, and I'm just going to use my selected control. We can set a start and end time to bake to, so we're going to set this to 300. And down here, we're going to check Smart Bake. And what this will do is it will make it so it's just baking the keyframes we need in case we want to edit these. And I'll just hit Bake on this, so that way we get these idle clips. And now we'll be able to bring in basically seconds of this guy idling, which will be good for what we're doing. Now, from here, I want to create another animation clip, which is going to be at kind of rotating around this point from this position. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a little bit more time here, go out to 600. And what I'm going to do is at this keyframe at 300, just make sure everything has a keyframe that we're going to potentially move. So I'm just going to set key on this, set key on this, and set key on my locator. Then what I want to have happen now is I want it to probably continue idling, but have the ability to kind of move and rotate it as it goes. So we could do this a number of ways. We could bake in this up and down movement and animate on top with something else. So that might be a good way to go. So let's do that. I'm going to grab the control that is controlling the up and down movement here. We can continue to bake here by going to Keys, Bake Simulation, and we could bake this out to 600, so we'll do 300 to 600 this time. And we'll just go ahead and bake that. So that'll get that baked, and it looks like it is giving me animation layers, which is not desirable. So I might want to undo that. This was on the bake settings. If you do run into this issue, I don't know if it's on by default, you can right-click these and just merge layers. But when you do, make sure Smart Bake's turned on. Normally, it doesn't bake to layers in my experience. So that's kind of a new one to me. Let me just see if there's a setting I have on that's doing that. So let's go to Keys, Bake Simulation. And you'll see it's setting it to new layer here. Let's just do base animation. There we go. Yours probably won't have that if you're doing this fresh, so just be aware. You'll probably be good. I do need to set the post-infinity, pre-infinity again here, so let me do that and delete this last keyframe. I don't know how that got in there. All right, so let's go ahead and bake that, and we should be good now. All right, so that's going to give us these here, and I'm just focusing on the clip from 300 onwards. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to have it spin in a circle. I don't know if we want that to be a full 10 seconds, but we'll figure it out. So let's think here. So 1 second is 30 frames, so maybe at 330 here, what we'll have happen is we'll have this come down to a center point, or some point below this, like so, and maybe even further away. So our object will kind of look at this area, and then what we can do is we can have it rotate around it. So how we would do that is all we have to do is move this center control here, because that's an aim constraint, right? So what that should do is make it aim at it the entire time. So I have to think of how many frames I actually want this to go for. I have it set to 600, so let's just have it set to 600. I'll keyframe that here at the end. And then in terms of increments, we can kind of think of how this divides into 4. And what we need to look at is the 300 frames we have, and that's 300 divided by 4 to make it kind of go to 4 points. So every 75 frames, we're going to move it. So at 375 here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it out and over. I'm going to do this along here, so that way it moves, and we'll just have it go kind of around that center point that it's looking at. And then we'll go ahead and add 75 more frames to that. So at 450, we'll go ahead and have it move basically in front, like so. And then we'll go to 75 more after that to 525. And we'll have it move over into here. And now if I hit play, we should see that kind of going in a circle around that point, like so, observing whatever that object is that we put in front of this probe. So that's going to be our observe animation. The last thing we want to do is just kind of make sure that these curves all work in here well. And this is a bit challenging. There's a couple things we could do. For example, to visualize, I could create something like a motion trail here. And we could just go ahead and create this. And we could look at the rotates here and just try and get these to basically be smoother, which will be a challenge. But you can see there's a translate Z here. If I delete these kind of additional keyframes I have, it should help these smooth out. Also here you can see how we have this kind of funky ease in, ease out. Now we don't necessarily want to alter this for the front frames, but we do want these two to kind of match up. So I could take the broken tangents here and try and adjust these to just kind of have a little bit more finesse. So that way, as this is moving, we get a nice arc. And you can see now it's having an easier time observing things in terms of this visually. In terms of the translate Z, this looks okay. I think we're having the same situation here. I have to think. It looks like those work out okay. So I think that's pretty smooth. I think that'll work well for our observe. You can see we're maintaining our up and down movement, and we're getting the nice little look here that we're going for. So we have two animation clips essentially that we can cut up and we can utilize now inside of our engine to give this some variety. We have an idle, and then we have this observe where it's going to go around in a circle. So let's take a look at how to bake these. I'm going to set this back down to 0, and we're going to bake these animations down to the joint data so we can export this. So let me save, and we'll save this as our probe animation. Now, baking is an essential key to get this into Unity. I showed you how to bake here for the sake of kind of cycling our animation and making it repeat. And we do this quite often in film and cinematics if we want to use this kind of as a base. So for example, for a walk cycle or an up and down movement like this, baking like this is great. What we want to do now, though, is we want to bake down to the joint data, and we want to delete the rig so we can export this as just the joint and just the geometry. And the reason we want to do that is to save on as much data as possible. Now, to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to come into my Visualize trail editor here and just delete all of them. And let's go ahead and bake this. So what you would do for the bake in this instance is you come in here to the probe joint, and in this case, if it was a character, it'd be the entire joint hierarchy. You'd come up here to Edit Keys, Bake Simulation. You'd want to check below. That will make it so it grabs all the joints in the hierarchy here. And you want to make sure that we have this set to the frame range we want. So in this case, 0 to 600. Make sure it's not going to an animation layer. You want to be on the base animation. You could check Smart Bake or not. Smart Bake will only bake the necessary keyframes, and this can actually be very useful, but sometimes it can have issues if the curve interpolation doesn't get correct or anything like that. So I'm going to turn that off, and we can just click Bake. And this will bake this to the joint information. Now, what's important to understand is this does break the rig. So at this point, my rig is useless. You'll see it no longer works. But you should be able to hit play and still see your animation. And that's because what happened here is we took this information that was on this joint here, and we baked it into every last single keyframe on the timeline. Now, what we can do from here is we can prep this to export. So what we would essentially do is just delete the control group, and we could probably keep the joint group. There's nothing wrong with that, but we could get rid of that. And this parent constraint, we actually don't need anymore either. We could delete that and just have the joint. And this will make it a lot lighter going into our game engine and make it so we just have the data we need. Now, the next thing to do is look at how to export an animation. We can use our game exporter for this. So I can come to File, Game Exporter here, and the game exporter is actually ideal for this because we can access this section here called Animation Clips. Now, if we come into animation clips, it actually allows us to create our clips inside of here that the game engine are going to be able to pick from in the state machine to hook up. We do so by simply clicking this plus icon, designating a start and end time, and giving it a name. So in this case, I'll go ahead and hit the plus icon. We'll name this idle, and we'll say it's from frame 0 to frame 300. And remember, we created a second animation, so I'll create another clip here. We'll go ahead and give this a name, which will be inspect, and that's going to be from 300 to 600. Notice there is a frame overlap here. That's okay. It's a little bit less than ideal because it may have issues with animation curves, but let's just see what it gives us and go from there. Now, as far as the settings go, that's pretty much all you need. There are some settings down here you can see that we may want to uncheck. For example, bake animation, we don't need this because we already baked it. And embed media, sometimes you don't want that. That's the material and texture hookups. If you're going to do that manually, you don't need that. We'll leave it on, but I just want to make you aware of it because if you needed to make the data lighter for like a mobile game, sometimes we do turn that off. But this one we can turn off because we already did that work. Now, just like we did before, we can select our path, we can give it a name, and we can kick it out of here. In this instance, I'm actually just going to overwrite our probe. So I'll come into the probe here. We'll go ahead and put it in this folder, and I'll just simply name this probe and export. And at this point, it should be good to go. So we'll click OK. And if we hop over here into Unity, we can go ahead and take a look at this. Now, we need to set it up inside of here under my assets here. We have our probe. So if I come in now and navigate to where this probe's located, I have it already pulled up. I can navigate to my newly exported probe, which should have the same name. And I can just drag and drop this onto here and replace, and we should see in Unity an update. Now, we had the probe in the scene, but I removed it recently, so we don't currently see it. We could set it up in here, or we could create a new one, but more importantly, we need to look at the probe and make sure it has animation data. Sometimes this doesn't transfer in, so I don't see the animation data getting transferred into here, which isn't a great sign. Let's go ahead and delete this, and you'll see we have an issue here where it actually did kick them out. I just didn't notice. We have probe idle and probe inspect. Now, there's a couple different ways you can deal with animation clips. You could deal with individual files like this, but this tends to be less than ideal because it's a lot more data, and we want less data going in if possible. So let's go ahead and delete these. And let's take a look at how we could get those as a single file. All right, so let's take a look in here and let's talk about how we can change that. Notice this save multiple clip files. That is the culprit. What that's doing is it's sending each individual thing out of here. And depending on your workflow and your pipeline, this can be okay. It can create a lot of separate data, and sometimes it's good. It just kind of depends on how the data is being used. For example, if we were using this data across multiple rigs, this is an instance where this might be a good way to approach it, because we could just take that animation data then and apply it to the appropriate rig in Unity. But if we're creating bespoke animations to a specific rig, it can be nice to combine them into it. And regardless, it doesn't really matter. It's just a means of getting it into there, Unity. Now, my preferred way is to save clips to a single file, like so, and then export this. And what this will do is it will create a nice little self-contained file, which was what I was trying to show earlier, which is just probe here. And if we go ahead and drag and drop this in, instead of having separate clips, you'll see that the idle and the inspect animations are contained within this, as well as the rig. So that's going to get this all set up and in place. The next step is to basically make it animate and do stuff. So let's go ahead and bring it into our scene here and just assemble it again. I'll bring it into my project. I'm going to set this to 0, and just kind of move it up and out away from Ellen, so that way we can see it, and scale it up. Now, it's scaling from kind of a weird spot, and the reason why is it's scaling from where the rig was placed. I didn't really look at the rig data, but if we take a look at the rig, it's going to deal with that location, and you can see how it's at the base there. So that should be okay. It does seem like it's upside down, though, which is slightly concerning to me. I don't know why it appears to be upside down when I scale. That one's a bit of a mystery, so we'll see how it works. But it should be okay. In terms of this, remember, we changed the LODs on the last one, so I'm just going to kind of pull these back a bit here so they work out better, and we can assign the materials. Now, ideally, I'd want to delete these old materials and extract the new ones, but you could also assign materials here. So, for example, I could just drag and drop my original material and hit apply, and do the same here and hit apply, and that will get that hooked up. We may need to adjust it, though, because the lens is not transparent for some reason. That's interesting. So I might need to extract that out or experiment with why that's happening. In this case, I'll just delete these and we'll reset up our materials to see if that fixes it. This actually seems to be the issue, which is interesting. You'll see we actually only exported one material with this. So apparently whenever I set this up, the lens material didn't get detected, which surprises me, because if I'm not mistaken, that should be a separate material. So I'm curious if enabling transparency on it may have had an issue. So let's disable that and try exporting again. Sometimes you run into these weird issues where it doesn't like what you're doing, but we can just re-export the probe over the old one, and hopefully this time around run into no issues here. So we have our probe here. We'll go ahead and drag and drop and just replace. And ideally in Unity, we should see two materials. Now, we're still not, which is interesting. So it still has two inputs, though, so that should be okay. I'm not really sure why we don't see two of these, though. Let me go ahead and extract this one. Ah, interesting. It actually isn't giving me the option to extract from prefab either. So in this case, I'm actually going to delete this and try bringing it in again just to see. There we go. So for whatever reason, dragging and dropping that was causing an issue, but this looks fine. So hopefully this will work out for us and we can just reset up our materials. You do often have to kind of backtrack in games when you're setting up assets. There's kind of the test, and then there's the actual implementation. But it's pretty quick, and it's important to know that going back and forth is common. You do it all the time. All right, so was this one set to transparent? It is. Let's set that one to opaque. Let's keep this one to transparent, and in this case, load in our albedo map with transparency. I'm a little bit confused. Secondary maps. That's the issue. I put this in as a secondary map. I was meant to put that in as an emissive. Make sure you check that emission. There we go. Now this should all be set. Remember, we can bump this up to 2 to increase the intensity here, and if we want, we can give it a color. So that way we have a nice probe color, and our probe's all set and reconstructed. Okay, now for the animation stuff. As you might have guessed, we could extract the animation stuff. We actually don't necessarily need to, and that's one of the cool things. But what we do from here is we go ahead and set up an animation controller. So what we do for an animation controller is we right-click, create, and we're going to go ahead and look for our animation controller here. We'll go ahead and name this one probe. And we can set this up to have our animations without extracting, which is one of the really cool things and one of the reasons why I didn't mind having them combined into a single file. So if I double click this, it's going to open the animator, and usually I like to dock the animator over here next to my play area. But what I can do is I can actually just drag and drop this asset into here, and you'll see we have the idle and we have the inspect. Now, what we're going to want to have happen in this instance is we're going to want to have the idle play, then we're going to want to go to the inspect, and then we're going to want to come back to the idle. So that way it's kind of inspecting an area, idling, inspecting an area, and we can just have this thing as our environment as sort of a passive probe. So I could right-click here, and we can select this option to make transition. This will allow us to transition to the inspect animation, and then likewise I can go to the inspect animation and make a transition back to the idle, and what that will do is it will create an infinite loop where the idle goes to the inspection and the inspection back to the idle. So upon entry, it's going to play the idle is going to play all the way through and then go to the inspect, and the inspect all the way back to the idle, and that's kind of the base setup there for animations. Now, I mentioned in a previous section, we looked at Ellen's state machine and we talked about whose responsibility it is to set this up. If your dream is to become a game animator, I encourage you to dive into this and really learn how this works. There's a lot of videos out there, a lot of courses, but you know, if you just want to work in games and you want to know how to hook up animations, how to check them, make sure they're working, you can honestly stop here. And my professional experience, this is the extent I've had to do in the workplace. When working on my own personal games, my own personal projects, I've created game controllers, I've hooked up these to different parameters, so all that stuff's amazing to know. But when it comes to actually doing it in the workplace, it's pretty rare that you have to do that as the animator. So just kind of be aware of that. You can go deeper than this if you want to get into that, be able to hook it into code and controllers. You don't necessarily have to. Now, with that said, this should be good to go without us needing to adjust anything. We should be able to jump into the game here and take a look at this. So let's go ahead and try that. I'm going to hit play, and we can see if this is animating or not. Now, you're actually going to run into an issue because it's not going to animate. It's just going to be floating there. Now, bonus points if anyone knows why it's not animating. The other thing is I need to double check that normal map. I'm not sure if the normal map's working right, and the LODs probably need to be adjusted. Now, for those of you who were like, hey, I know exactly why that's not animating, yeah, we never attached the animator to this guy, did we? So remember, there's that third component besides the controller, which is the animator, and we should be able to just put this on the top group of the probe here. I'm going to add component here and look for animator, and the animator basically says this is going to be animated, and you animate it by dragging in the controller. So we can just drag in the controller, and now this should work. Now, I am going to lower this slightly because it does seem really high up there in the game, so I'm just going to bring that down, and we can take a look at where it's going to appear. So let's hit play, and we should see our animation all set up and ready to go. So there it is. Our animation is going to be idling. And if we take a look at our state machine, you'll see it's going to play the idle. And then once the idle gets done, it's going to do its inspect. Now, it is inspecting upside down, so my curiosity was correct. For whatever reason, my little object does seem to be flipped upside down. But you can see how that's going to go back to inspecting. And then once it's done inspecting, it's going to go back to idling and then back to inspecting. Now, if I wanted to fix this, I could look at the export settings. If I'm not mistaken, there is an axis here, and you can see it says the up axis is Y. That should be correct. You can switch between Y and Z as the up axes. For whatever reason, though, I feel like it grabbed it wrong, which is quite interesting. We could also look at the data inside of here, in the asset here, and look at the animation and see if there is any issues with that. And it looks like they all transferred one-to-one. So I'm actually not really sure why it appears to be upside down, unless the transform data is also upside down, but it doesn't seem like it is. So that's an interesting one to me. If I rotate this 180, it should be correct. And this is something that happens with game exports sometimes. It will flip the Y, and that's because in some game files it is flipped. But this doesn't seem correct because Y is up in Unity. So I've actually never ran into this issue. I'm curious if there's something I'm missing in the settings here. If you guys run into the issue, let me know, and we can check it out. We could try exporting this in Z and seeing if it works, but for the sake of today's demonstration, I think we'll wrap it up there and leave it up to my mysterious rigging. There is a good chance, too, that I forgot to freeze transforms on something, or set it up wrong, so in the rig, that is. So that may be the factor. But anyways, you can see we've successfully gotten an asset into here and animating and doing its thing. So right now this is kind of inspecting our character, but we could create some sort of narrative with these in terms of like nature. So for example, I could find a plant and we could have this maybe inspecting a plant instead, which might be kind of fun. So let me move it into place here. See if we can get it over here a little bit more. And maybe have it analyze this plant. And like I mentioned, it might be something with the rig, so we could look at this too. If I take a look at my rig, maybe somewhere along the way here I flip something. It could also have to do with how that constraint baked. I didn't really think about that, but that may be what's causing the issue, is the constraint may have actually flipped this. Or your genius instructor wasn't looking at the direction of arrows inside of Maya, and I actually animated it upside down. So I am the problem. I could have sworn I wasn't the problem, but hey, it's Monday today when I'm recording this. Give me some slack. Okay, so anyways, I am the problem. You can see we can fix the problem. I can be fixed. Anyways, let's check this out, see how this looks, and then maybe do one last thing or two last things, but let's check it out, see if it looks like this guy's inspecting something. We can see our little probe there. I think 10 seconds might be a little bit too long, but you can see there it goes. It does its little investigation around this area. Maybe it's scanning, taking photos, what have you, and masterpiece. Now, we could also add animation on top of this, which is kind of interesting. I could use Unity animation to animate this further, moving from place to place to place. You could add a character controller so it actually could move that way. There's a lot of really cool stuff we could do. Now, in this instance, I am actually going to adjust these LODs to be pretty far, since that seems to be triggering all the time on this guy. It looks like I'm kind of losing LOD2 here, so I'm going to move that way out here. So that way we are getting it appropriately adjusted. And we can add in a few more details. So one of the things we could add in, for example, is we could add in some audio for this pass. So we've already looked at that, right? We could come into the probe here. We could add audio. So I could just add component. We could add audio, source, and we could look for a sound. We've already looked for a few of these, so in the audio clips here, you can see we have plenty of these to kind of pick from. We decided that the ship was probably the better one. So the drop ship here, we could play through these. I could also look for them down here to listen to them again. Usually you want to listen to them before putting them in, so let me go ahead and just take a look at these in my Explorer. We can double click to listen. All right, we'll just input this into here, the drop ship monoloop. Apparently everything on this planet is going to have the same sound effect, but let's go for it. We'll just go ahead and drop in the drop ship here. So drop ship, we'll grab the monoloop here. Should be good. I might go ahead and play around with something like the pitch, maybe make it lower for this one, just to make it kind of interesting. And remember, we're going to make this full 3D, so we hear it right where it is. That should be good. Volume's 1, that's probably a little bit loud, but whatever. Let's hit play. Now it should animate, should have sound. And, you know, in terms of animating, having the sound change, that's all driven by code, you know, once again. So not something we need to worry about. But we'll have this little object here. Now, I don't really hear it, so I might have to play around with it in terms of sound. But we could add audio in there, just like we've done before. Not quite sure why we're not hearing it, but there's probably a reason. Let's see. Man awake. Loop. We didn't have loop checked. That's probably going to be the issue. So make sure we have loop checked there. That way we can actually hear this thing. So let's go ahead and give this a listen. I've turned on audio in the recording, so you should be able to hear it this time. And there we go, you can hear that humming noise. We can see if it moves from the source. I don't think it does, because it's attached to the root. We could potentially attach this to the joint. So this is kind of an interesting factor. I could take this here, this audio sound source here. Usually you can come in here to these options here, and you can copy them. And I could come down to the probe, and I could actually put it onto the joint itself, the probe joint here, and we could piece this. I'm trying to remember how to piece these, though. I don't really know. We'll just add another sound here. That'll be good enough. And we can piece component as new. We'll delete this one. That isn't pasted, and this one should be good. Now, on our main probe, we can turn this off here, the audio source, so that way, instead of following the group, which doesn't move, it should follow the joint. And you have to test these things. You know, I don't know if it's going to be perfect, but let's see. Maybe we can hear that move and kind of see our spatial sound in motion, which is kind of fun when it comes to animation, since we haven't looked at that yet. So, give it a listen. And when it moves, hopefully we'll hear it get further away. You can hear that audio drop. So you can see our audio is now following that. So we have our little probe. It actually has sound, and it can go and inspect things. Really cool. So fun little addition to our environment here, kind of bringing this to life. All right, so we can come to my prefabs now. Inside of here, we have our floating rocks, gates, particles. I could go ahead and create a new folder here. Maybe we can name this probes, and we could have these probes throughout our game, and maybe we can incorporate them into some sort of a story element, or even integrate them into the 3D game kit in some way where they make sense. I grabbed the wrong thing here. Make sure you grab the top probe. And now we have this probe we can place in this game in various areas. So let's go ahead and add a couple more to our scene just for fun. I'll just add them in and around this area. I did flip it, so it should be working correctly now. But we could go ahead and, you know, add these to key areas of interest. And we can just kind of check them out and see how they look in our scene and how they impact things. So let's just check and make sure those ones work, and we'll probably wrap things up after that for this demo, but hopefully this gives you an idea on some of the fun stuff we can do, even without having crazy state machines. We can create our own fun little orbs that add to our environment and tell a story. And you can do all sorts of different things here, obviously. These are a very simple idea that we can execute quickly, but you could create something like a water mill, and really just about anything you can imagine. You can have a lot of fun with it. So something like this, though, is pretty unique, adds a bit to our story, and doesn't take a whole lot of effort to add in, which is really cool. All right, cool. So there we go. Probes. Bee probes. All right, awesome. So that's going to wrap up the processing of animating in Maya and successfully bringing it into Unity. Now you've seen how to create your own animations, export it cleanly, and use it inside of Unity using the animation system. This is a powerful workflow that bridges the gap between our 3D applications and game engines. It opens up a ton of creative possibilities, even if you don't know how to program, just artistically, and even in terms of level design. We could add colliders to these, and we could turn them into gameplay elements as well. So if this helps you out, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment if you want to see more animation workflows in the future, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.